Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Tony Wiltshire. I'm Minister Counsellor of the Barbados High Commission. And on behalf of the High Commission, I would like to welcome you to this, the fourth event for our celebrations of the 40th anniversary of our independence. You will be aware that it started on Sunday evening for church service, continued on Tuesday for presentation on the Barbados Stock Exchange here at the Mission with the CEO of the Barbados Stock Exchange, Mr. Marlon, who will be here sooner rather than later, and his chairman, Mr. Andrew St. John. We officially opened the art exhibition, which is on the first floor yesterday evening, and this evening we are continuing for presentation on Barbados' past, present, and future by the distinguished historian and expert on cultural matters, Mr. Trevor Marshall. At this point in time, we just want to have a few welcome remarks by our High Commissioner, His Excellency, Mr. Pollard. Oh, I see him, he's just slipping out of the kitchen. Yeah. And and I would also like to acknowledge the presence of our Deputy High Commissioner, Mr. Herbert Yarwood. He's right at the back, he's just joined us as well. Excellency, I just ask you to join me at the podium to say a few welcome remarks. Thank you. His Excellency, Mr. Edwin Pollard, High Commissioner of Barbados to the United Kingdom.
Good. It's a pleasure to see so many of you here, and thank you very much for coming. It's my pleasure to welcome you. We've tried to arrange an independence program that caters to various tastes and expectations. I know that the associations usually have their dances and brams and gigs or whatever you call them. So we thought that we would have something a bit more serious. So it's a rather mixed program. I hope you will find this evening interesting. I'm sure you will. I was saying to Herbie that I'm satisfied that once you mention something about emancipation and slavery and so on, you will get a reasonable attendance, because we all like to know how we've benefited since the abolition. We spent most of this year celebrating the abolition of the slave trade, not abolition of slavery, and I am still somewhat anxious, if not concerned, that those celebrations should result in some tangible improvement in the conditions and so on of those who were freed. So we look forward to a legacy from those celebrations. But it is not for me to give you the lecture on slavery and the abolition thereof, nor did you come to hear me. So I will stick to what my task is, and that is to just welcome you and hope that you find the evening to be interesting. Whilst I'm here, let me wish you a happy Independence Day, and hope that it will stir in you your nationalistic feelings so that we can operate with greater unity, because you know where there's unity, there's strength, especially when you're not home. So I wish you all and the associations a happy independence, and I hope you enjoy this evening's proceedings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, High Commissioner. Our distinguished presenter this evening is Mr. Trevor Marshall, who calls himself a native of the parish of St. John. He was educated at law school, at Mona and Keifel campuses of the University of the West Indies, and at Waterloo University, Ontario, Canada. He holds degrees in history and in law and professional teaching credentials in education. Trevor has been head of the Department of History at Barbados Community College for 20 years and as a part-time lecturer at the University of the West Indies, Keifel, for 35 years. He currently lectures to students in cultural studies at the postgraduate level. He has been Assistant Chief Examiner. No, he's presently is Assistant Chief Examiner in Caribbean Studies for CXC. He has been Chief Examiner for History for CXC. He has lectured in Canada, US, Africa, and South America on diverse subjects. He currently serves as Consultant Historian to the Prime Minister's Office, Barbados, as Consultant on Cultural and Historical Matters to the Commission for Pan-African Affairs, and he's also Consultant to the Community Independent Celebration Secretariat at the National Cultural Foundation. He has published a number of books, including Folk Songs of Barbados, in collaboration with Peggy McGarry and Grace Thompson. He has served as Chief Judge for Pico de Crop Calypso competition in the 1980s, which coincided incidentally with the rise of red plastic bag. And coincidentally, judged the Pico de Crop competition this year in 2007, when plastic bag also won. He has published articles in scholarly journals, newspapers, and periodicals. This is the official brief resume of Mr. Trevor Marshall. Unofficially, Trevor, what I consider a friend of mine, is easily one of the most foremost experts on cultural matters in Barbados. He advises the Ministry of Culture on cultural matters, as I said, and he's primarily responsible for doing research. And for those of you who are not familiar with the history of Barbados, there's a tremendous wealth of material there to do research on, and Trevor is a dignitary in that field. We are privileged this afternoon for Trevor to join us. In terms of his knowledge of history, he makes history come alive. And that is the reason why he's been at the community college for the last 20 years and he hasn't gone on to higher things. Because when you get to A-level at community college and Trevor teaches you, any dean or head of faculty would not want Trevor to leave. So basically, he's an institution there, and they don't expect he would ever leave. We are privileged this afternoon to have Trevor with us. We wanted to have him here some time ago, but of course, Trevor is teaching and doing so many different things that we were not able to do it. When I spoke to him, he told me that this would have been his first visit to England. I couldn't believe it. I was shocked, but Trevor said, he's teaching British history for so long, he knows Britain by heart. And believe me, he does, because when you travel all around Britain and you talk to Trevor, he seems to know places as though he lived here all his life. It's my pleasure to introduce Trevor to you. I'm sure that you'll enjoy what he has to say. He's controversial, and that's precisely why we've invited him. Thank you. May I present to you Mr. Trevor Marshall.
Thank you very much, Mr. Master of Ceremonies, and I want to first of all thank God for bringing me here. It is still surreal. I still cannot believe that I'm here in England. Up to Monday afternoon it was in doubt. I didn't even have permission yet to come, and we grabbed everything and ran to the airport, and I'm here. His Excellency, the High Commissioner to Britain, Deputy High Commissioner, members of Barbadian associations in Britain, members of the staff of the High Commission, ladies, gentlemen, and Rosemary Allen, Andrea Padmore, and, shall I say it, Pigeon Legs? The topic this evening is Barbados and the slave trade, present, past, and future. And as Tony said, I'm supposed to be a pretty controversial person in Barbados. In fact, they don't call me a historian there. They call me a twistorian. I'm supposed to be a distorter of facts. I'm supposed to be a misleader of the people. And I shall therefore live up to my reputation here. As we get into the exercise this evening, let me first say that what we are doing here has been replicated throughout the world, and especially the Caribbean world. And in England, I saw a register and a schedule of the events which have taken place in this country, and particularly in London, and I'm impressed. Last year, at about this time, or perhaps it was even earlier, in October last year, on a television program in Barbados, I adverted to the fact that on the 25th of March 2007, the whole world would be celebrating the fact that at 12 noon on that day, in 1807, George III, who reigned between 1760 and 1820, George III signed into law a bill for the abolition of the slave trade. And we indicated that Barbados would be part, or should be part of that celebration, of that commemoration, if only because between Africa and Barbados, there is a 3,500-mile stretch of sea called the Middle Passage. And what a lot of people in Barbados did not know, and I hope that you people here know it, the first port of call for the slave ships going to every British territory, be it British North America, Canada, be it the mainland colonies of the USA, be it Jamaica, the Bay or Honduras Bay settlement, St. Kitts, Nevis, Anguilla, Antigua, Montserrat, Dominica, St. Lucia, Grenada, St. Vincent, Tobago, Trinidad, and of course British Guyana. Every enslaved person intended for slavery in those places landed at Bridgetown, Barbados. And that was a stunning revelation. A lot of people did not know that. And they did not realize that when you stand at Cherry Tree Hill and you look that direction, if you have some very, very powerful binoculars, you can see Africa. Because the only stretch of land between Cherry Tree Hill and St. Andrew, between after the sea is Africa, perhaps Dakar, Senegal, of course. And these revelations are stunning to Barbadians, and they should not be. But our generation and our people generally have been deliberately not told about the slave trade. I grew up with a mother who was born in 1929. She's 78. She told me Barbadians were never slaves. And that is what she believed. Because she used to sing to me, "Rule Britannia, Britannia you rule the waves, for Britons never, never, never shall be slaves." And she said we were British. She ignored the fact that we might have been British by possession, but that the black people of Barbados, those looking like us today, were never British. They were of African descent, and they were slaves. In fact, there are a number of people in Barbados today who still are in a state of arrested development and a state of denial, denying, first of all, they're of African descent, and denying the fact that their ancestors were slaves. There are people who will come to me and say, "Well, I don't know about you, but I'm an African." I say, "But hold on, but people from Africa came to Barbados as slaves." "I don't care about that. I'm not a slave." But I have developed a way of dealing with them. I said, "You know something? Congratulations. You should get a United Nations award for just having discovered the most basic, the new history, a new secret of history. That is that the 82,000 people, 82,807 people who were emancipated in Barbados on the 29th of July 1833 and became free on the 1st of August 1834, all of them went back to Africa and left the island free. And a new set of people, black people, came down from heaven and inhabited Barbados. There is no connection between those people who were emancipated on the 1st of August 1834 and the 1st of August 1838 and yourselves. And they look at me like they want to kill me. And I rub the salt in the wounds by saying, "You know something? I have discovered that one of our national heroes, the Right Excellent Grantley Herbert Adams, he was not Grantley Adams. He might have been Kisu Toure, because his grandfather was an enslaved person called James Hammond on the Adams Estate, Adams Castle Estate in Christchurch. That is where the Adams Castle, that's where the Adams name came from. So Kisu Toure, Grantley Adams, or James Hammond, became a Barbadian, And we have evidence. We could see the birth certificates of James Hammond. We've seen the birth certificate of his son. Then we've seen the birth certificate of Fitzherbert Adams, the father of Grantley Adams. Of course, we have the birth, marriage, and death certificates of Grantley Adams. And of course, we have the birth and death and marriage certificates of J.M. Tom Adams and his children Rawdon. So at least the Adams family are descended from enslaved persons. So if Barbadians at home live in denial and live in a state of arrested development, we historians are exposing the fact that Barbadians are descended from African people. And furthermore, Mormon investigators have shown that they can tell whoever in Barbados was enslaved. They can also show, and DNA explorations are now being done to place you back into Nigeria, Togo, Benin, Sierra Leone, Ivory Coast, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Guinea, on the West African coast, Mauritania, down to Angola, Cameroons, and Zaire. So we are of African descent. And it is a simple fact to acknowledge it and move on. Do not keep in denial. And this fact of denial is why we cannot deal with the African slave trade. This is why my mother felt that other people were slaves but not Barbadians. But hearken, listen, people. When the African slave trade began, when Hawkins in 1562 brought the first set of blacks, bought them from Spaniards and sold them, and brought the information to Queen Elizabeth I, and registered his amazement and his pleasure at this new form of commerce. He started a train of events, 1562, which was not to end until the abolition of slavery in Brazil in 1888. He started a train of events of Britishers, or Englishmen as they were at that time, Dutchmen, etc., becoming involved in what became the most productive and lucrative commerce in that era. Black cargoes from West Africa. And there's considerable evidence that it was a lucrative exercise. Where does Barbados come into this? Well, Barbados, as you know, was settled by the English, 1625. It was colonized in, 1626 or 27. Morris Greenwich has a new book showing that the date of colonization is not necessarily 17th of February 1627, but 17th of February 1626. So we historians are very busy. The Barbadian involvement in it began from about 1627, because that ship, which brought 80 Englishmen to Barbados, brought 50 settlers, 30 crew who went back to England, and 10 Africans. So according to the Black Stallion, who said we came on the same trip, on the same ship, that is correct in relation to Barbados. Black Barbadians and white Barbadians came on the same ship and on the same trip. 17th of February, either 1626 or 27. Therefore, we have been on that island for as long as whites. But we have been on the island as people who were black cargoes and people who were supposed to be hewers of wood and drawers of water and cutters of cane, and we were sold and bought like pigs and sacks of potatoes, etc. The slave trade is the handmaid of the sugar industry. Slavery was a fact in the ancient world, but in the New World, slavery began with Cuba, Columbus's visits to Cuba, etc. Amerindians were enslaved. Then with the cattle ranching, and of course the onset of tobacco planting in the Caribbean, you had slavery. We in Barbados are distinctly and expressly involved with the beginning of the English version of the African slave trade. In 1637, Barbadian and other Caribbean tobacco failed because of the ever-present and dominant state of Virginia tobacco on the London market. Therefore, these rocks stood the possibility. They were in danger of becoming extinct, barren, etc. And then Barbadian whites, hearing of the success of sugarcane in Bahia and Recife in Brazil, sent for a Dutch Jew called Pieter Brewer, who conducted experiments between 1637 and 1640 to see if sugarcane would grow and prosper in Barbados. Ergo, Eureka, he discovered that sugarcane and Barbados went together like horse and carriage, love and marriage, or love and divorce, rather. Right, so Barbados from 1640 began to produce cane sugar for the London market. By 1645, there was a re-export trade. England was sending sugar down the Thames, across the Channel, to France, and to the rest of Europe. Barbados hit the jackpot. We look at 1640 as the beginning of Barbados' involvement in the African slave trade, because there was no other labor force. And Eric Williams, in his book Capitalism and Slavery, has said that when the Europeans discovered that they needed labor for this new agricultural revolution, the sugar industry, that they would have gone to the moon if it were possible, but that Africa was nearer. So they went to Africa. Not only Hawkins, but the Dutchmen, the Frenchmen, the Portuguese, not the Spaniards. The Spaniards were prohibited from it. And England was a late comer in the African slave trade. But she made up for that lateness. By 1672, the Royal African Company gained a concession, a charter from King Charles to do what? Expressly ferry black cargoes, or cargoes, shiploads of black human beings from West Africa to the West Indies. It was a holding company. It had 8 directors, and of those 8 directors, 5 were from Barbados. 5 of the 8 directors of the single company which had exclusive control of the slave trade between Britain and West Africa and the Caribbean came from Barbados. Barbados became the linchpin of the slave trade as far as the English were concerned. Without Barbados, there would have been no slave trade to England. Who knows, without Barbados, there would have been no slave trade. Furthermore, if Barbados were not a stable, easily controlled society, enabling the British, the English at that time, until 1707, enabling the English not to worry about them, but to expand their control over the Caribbean, we might not be here commemorating the bicentenary of the abolition of the slave trade. Barbados was crucially important. Standing 100 miles outside the Eastern Caribbean chain of islands and not approachable by from that eastern side, as you know, from Cove Bay right through to Paragon. There is a reef there which is made famous by the legend about Sam Lord, hanging coconut lanterns and coconut trees. And by the way, Sam Lord was never a pirate. He's buried in Kensal Green Cemetery, and you do not bury pirates who were hanged in an ordinary cemetery. If you go there, you can see he did not die on a gibbet. He died of a heart attack in his club. He was never a pirate. He never got attacked, never got assailed, never came into any court, either in Barbados or Britain, on a charge of piracy. But that is a myth that constitutes our history. And I can say that, no, I can't say that in Barbados, because the merry men accused me of wanting to destroy tourism, and a fellow darker than anybody in here told me I want killing for saying those kinds of things. But that is another story. So the Barbados, therefore, is intrinsically and integrally important to the development of the slave trade, because sugar demanded gang labor, meaning large hordes of persons, perhaps of the same race, but certainly controllable by few persons, and doing repetitive tasks. Cut sugar cane till it burn your hand, load sugar cane till it burn your hand, and the other tasks connected with it. So our society, Barbados, should be part of the United Nations Declaration of the Inhumanity of Man to Man. In fact, Barbados should be giving reparations, or some people in Barbados should be giving reparations to the Africans, but I shall come to that later. The point is that from 1637, when the first, 1637, when the first 27, when the first Africans came, until about 1810, Barbados ruled the waves in terms of importing Africans as slaves. 310,000 of them came through Barbados, and about 80,000 of those stayed. So many of them were re-exported. So many of them jumped overboard before they reached Barbados. The Middle Passage was a graveyard for approximately 10 million Africans. Another 10 million are said to have landed at major ports and have gone on through the Caribbean right through up to Canada. And Barbados will remain serene. While other Caribbean territories exchanged ownership, Barbados was Britain's major territory. And it is not true that Barbados is the only territory which remained British. Antigua did. And Antigua was settled in 1628, St. Kitts settled 1624, but Barbados and Antigua remained British throughout. Right. So Barbados had a key position, and it got filled up very quickly. By 1690, Barbados was not only considered the chiefest gem in the King of England's crown, but it was the most densely populated piece of real estate in the world at that time. And it still is one of the most densely populated pieces of agricultural real estate in the world, with a population density of 800 per square mile. So Barbados, therefore, had no need for constant injections of Africans. So our main business in the slave trade was accommodating people at the level at the back of Barclays, accommodating them in holding pens and re-exporting them. Barbados therefore gained quite a lot of prestige, quite a lot of money for that. And there is a persistent myth in Barbados. Historians have also subscribed to this myth, that the planters, the slave masters in Barbados, chose the best of the slave ones and sent the worst off to Jamaica. We historians have argued that that's not necessarily true, because, as in the case of judges, you may, as you know, George W. Bush may pick the most docile and compliant judges, so it seems. But when you get on the bench, you owe nobody any favor. Therefore, when enslaved persons came to Barbados, they may have seemed compliant and docile, but they engaged in acts of rebellion and resistance. And the Bussy Rebellion of 1816 indicates that they were not as docile as people thought. And as a matter of fact, the frequency of slave revolts in Jamaica can easily be explained. Jamaica is 4,411 square miles, 27 times the size of Barbados. I have tramped all over Jamaica as a student. I've been to Cudgels Cave in the Maroon Territory and the Cockpit Country. The Cockpit Country is as big as Barbados, and you can easily hide yourself there. And many of the Maroons and Cudgel and Johnny and Akompong fought the English there. There's no secret to that. Wherever people went in the Caribbean as slaves, they resisted enslavement. So the Barbadians were no more attuned to slavery than anybody else. One thing we would say is that the planters did select. They did select for Barbados women with good afternoons. Extremely good afternoons, right? Because Barbados, like Antigua and Montserrat, was a slave breeding station. So people tell me that they can tell Barbadian women anywhere where black people are together. Like an ant climbing up a wall, they're saying. Right, good afternoons, right. That is definite. The other things are speculation and myth. So our society becomes Britain's major territory. It becomes Britain's major territory in the Eastern Caribbean because of the slave trade. It brings lucre, filthy lucre, yes, to Britain. It is also the place in which Britain establishes Westminster in miniature. 1639, the Barbados House of Assembly. It is the place where, from 1628, the Anglican Church was established. Right? And all of these were then exported to the rest of the Caribbean. Indeed, there is a Barbados model of development. Those of you who have gone through notions about Puerto Rican model of development, you have missed the fact. There is a Barbados model, and whoever successfully publishes about 3 or 4 books on it will get a Nobel Prize. And I see my good friend Tony Phillips at the back. He probably will do that. But the Barbados model of development, economic development, simply is pack the island with unlimited supplies of cheap labor, slaves, put in charge of them a small number of whites at the plantation, a level of the plantations. Make sure that you ring the island with the British garrison, which was established at St. Anne's in 1702. Fill the slaves with the notion that you cannot escape this island, and therefore they will produce. Barbadians produce. They produce sugarcane, they produce molasses, they produce rum from 1702. Right? So that is the Barbados model of development. Development of an agricultural product with unlimited supplies of cheap labor and utilizing white management. And it remains the same up to today. Therefore, Barbados bulks large in the slave trade. It bulks large in the slave trade because, as we said, there are few, very few, if any, slave revolts. You have one in 1649. The Irish, who gave us our accent and our way of speaking, remember oil and onion, those are Irish forms of using the English language. And the Irish and the Africans joined together in 1649 for this first anti-plantation elite revolt, indentured persons and slaves. You had in 1675, 1692, and then for 124 years there were no slave revolts in Barbados until Busse in 1816. So Barbados is an excellent laboratory for the exercise and the experiment of controlling blacks and producing endless supplies of sugar, molasses, and rum. I saw the West India docks yesterday with Harrington Cumberbatch, and one can see it is just the other side of the coin from the pierhead in Bridgetown, and the barrels, the coopers there, are replicas of what we have seen at the museum in Bridgetown and what we've seen throughout Barbados. So there is no mystery about our involvement with the slave trade. We are as integral and as intrinsically important to the slave trade as any other territory. No other territory in the Caribbean has so much of an involvement with the slave trade as ourselves. Not even Brazil, which imported 5 million persons as slaves. Not even Jamaica, which imported 820,000 persons as slaves. Not even Cuba. None of them has that position in relation to the slave trade that Barbados does. A secure harbor. As I'm saying, inviolability. You could not be attacked. Only de Ruyter attacked Barbados in 1665. Cromwell in 1651 could not even get the Barbadians to surrender. Barbados was impregnable. Impregnable. Could not be breached. Could not be controlled. Therefore, from 1627, 1637 until 1833-34, Barbados and Britain have a partnership which drive the slave trade. And we ask ourselves, what did Barbados and Barbadians do when the agitation for the slave trade began? Now, let me indicate initially that when in 1807, on the 25th of March, at 12 o'clock, that act was signed, the Barbadian planter class were upset, but like Pilate, they could wash their hands of it easily. Because, as my good friend Carol Watson has pointed out, Barbados was the only British Caribbean territory not to object to the abolition of the slave trade. Do I hear a clap, an ironic clap? Don't clap, please. Why? Because Barbados, as we said, was chock full of black cargoes. Barbados did a thriving trade in re-export. And after 1792, in the Haitian Revolution, Barbados had a new lease on life producing sugarcane. Then Britain annexed St. Lucia Trinidad. Any Guyanese here? I'm about to say mud country. Anyhow, the Three Rivers territories, Berbice, Demerara, Essequibo. And the Barbadians saw a cloud no bigger than a man's hand on the horizon, that these territories would cut into Barbados' profits. Therefore, the Barbadians supported abolition of the slave trade. They supported abolition of the slave trade. They did not support abolition of slavery. And there are two different things we are looking at. And I must digress to say that people in Barbados still are in a bit of confusion as to what we have been celebrating this year. I gave a lecture at Erdeston Teacher Training College in Barbados up in March. I can't remember what it was. And the girl who is the lecturer introduced me and said I'd be talking about abolition of slavery. And I whispered to her, no, slave trade. Oh, the abolition of slavery came before the abolition of slave trade. Oh, I said, no. Oh, anyway, Mr. Marshall will tell you. So people are still arguing about the misconception that we're talking about the abolition of slavery. No, that was something else altogether. There had to be another 26 years of blood, sweat, tears, and toil for William Wilberforce and Thomas Clarkson, as Adam Hochschild has shown in this book. You should buy this book or avail yourself of it. Bury the Chains. This is a new assessment of the role of the two men. And Hochschild has resurrected Clarkson as being the foot soldier. We have been trained to regard Wilberforce as St. William, as the person who piloted the two acts almost single-handed. That is not true. And the new historiography, the new way of historians of looking at the subject in the Caribbean tends to, if not vilify Wilberforce, certainly to reduce his importance. Now, I stand totally with Wilberforce up to 1807. I do not argue the point, I do not support the point argued by some others that he jumped on a bandwagon. He created the bandwagon. From 1780 until 1807, he was almost alone in Parliament. He was considered, like Trevor Marshall, a madman, a crackpot, a twister, a person who wanted to destroy the economy of England. Because remember, the slave trade was the leading sector of the economy. Now imagine, ladies and gentlemen, all of us Barbadians, suppose I began talking in Barbados about getting rid of hotels, stopping people from going on the beach, stopping British Airways, Virgin, etc. from coming to Barbados. I would not only be deemed a madman, but somebody would find ways of sending me off to meet my maker before my time. Huh? Because I would be destroying the economy of Barbados. That was Wilberforce's position. Wilberforce was saying in and out, day in, day out, abolish the slave trade. And people say, wait, where does this madman come from? He comes from Hull? Oh, that is not part of Britain. Up there is too near to Scotland. It has fog. It affects his brain. And he kept on and on. He was derided. He was called Mr. Negro Wilberforce. He was called nigger lover, etc. People attacked him in every single way, but he kept on keeping on. He had Zachary Macaulay, James Stephen the Elder, Thomas Clarkson, Granville Sharp, Charles James Fox, and William Pitt, Prime Minister. He had them, he brought them into the fold, right? And it is he who kept the movement going in Parliament. I do not yield to anybody who says that Wilberforce is not the single most important factor in the abolition of the slave trade. 26 years later, it is Thomas Fowell Buxton and a new set of persons who take the activity and the resistance to another level. In between that time, there's the abolition of slavery in Denmark's territories. Haiti comes into being. There are slave revolts. There's Sharp's, Daddy Sharp, Samuel Sharp's rebellion in Jamaica, 1831-32, which caused the British and James Stephen to write the Abolition Act within 48 hours. We all know that. We don't think that Wilberforce is exclusively important or exclusively responsible for the abolition of slavery. But when it comes to the abolition of the slave trade, I challenge any academic to show me where Wilberforce jumped on a bandwagon and where the slaves made the masters or made the British abolish the slave trade. It did not happen. So where is Barbados in all of this? As I said, our Barbadian people supported the abolition of the slave trade. And they patted themselves like Pilate on their backs. After washing his hand, Pilate did pat himself on the back, but that is not in the Bible. The Barbadians did that because they thought that this is the end of it. But then up came the Buster Rebellion in 1816, and they began to attack Wilberforce. They attacked him so viciously. He was identified as the person behind Sarah Ann Gill. He was identified as the person behind Samuel Jackman Prescott. The slaves in Barbados dare not mention his name. And instead of Wilberforce, the Barbadians created a new hero, Horatio Lord Nelson. Today in Barbados, there are over 500 people with the name Horatio or Nelson. In Barbados, there is nobody with the name Wilberforce. And that indicates to you how Wilberforce and the abolition of slavery were seen in Barbados. The planters in Barbados attacked viciously anyone who tried to come between them and their black property. Sarah Ann Gill was put in prison. Her life was threatened. William Shrewsbury, the Methodist minister, had to escape Barbados dressed as a woman. Prescott was also attacked viciously. And when the Act of Abolition was passed, the Barbadians insisted to the British government that they should get compensation, reparations. Ladies and gentlemen, in 1833, the Act of Abolition had 20 clauses. And the last clause of those 20, there were, 133 clauses, about 64 of them, which might have been important. But Rosemary Clark and Marilyn Pollard can tell you that I've been teaching that there were 20 major clauses. Cut them down to 14. And the last one said that there should be compensation to those people who were being deprived of their property. 20 billion pounds, something like $1 trillion, or 1 trillion pounds in today's money were given to the 29,000 whites throughout the Caribbean. Jamaicans to 8 million and more. Barbadian whites got 2 million pounds in compensation money, reparations. With that, they built up Drax Hall, Nicholas Abbey. They refurbished themselves. They brought in new machinery, engaged in investigation of new technology and new varieties of sugar, etc. Barbados got a new lease on life as a result of the abolition of slavery. What did the enslaved people, 82,807, got? What did they get? Sorry. So Lionel Smith told them, servants, be obedient to those who are put in authority to you. Today you are being emancipated, but the law is strict and the law is heavy. And if you break the law, I have just instituted a police force. It came into being in 1835. Right? It was scheduled for 1834. It said, I've just instituted a police force. If you dare to break the law, you will go to jail. Right? Do not pass go. Go straight to jail. And that is what happened to black Barbadians. They were hounded back onto the plantations. They received not 1 cent. They had to live on Drax Hall Plantation, Fairy Valley Plantation. Where else? Where do you come from, Barton? The Bell Plantation, right? Spring Farm Plantation. Where else? Rock Hall, all the Rock Halls, St. Peter, St. Lucie, St. Philip, St. Andrew, Felix, Colleton Plantation. They all had to go back on those plantations. And in 1838, an act called the Masters and Servants Act was instituted. And it said that anybody who found themselves on that plantation at that time was deemed a servant. And the person who owned the plantation was a master. And you owed that person a day's work, 5 days a week, and half day on Saturday. And if you did not work, you would take up your Georgie bundle and move. And you were not given the right to build any houses of permanent building material. You had to build houses out of shack, cane arrow, pitch pine, etc. The beautiful, what do you call them? Chattel houses, which are a signature for Barbados now. That is what our people got, the chattel house. As big as from here to that lady in glasses there. Many of us grew up in chattel houses in Barbados, and we wondered why. Your parents and grandparents could not build anything more because they owed the plantation labor. And the located labor system was enforced. And the Masters and Servants Act lasted from 1840 until when? June 1937, 1 month before the Clement Payne riots. And you know this is why I still, despite what my colleagues say, still hold Grantley Adams in reverence. Grantley Adams and Hugh Gordon Cummins piloted in the House of Assembly in Barbados a bill to abolish the Masters and Servants Act. It was not abolished, but its more odious clauses were removed in July 1937. The act was taken from the statute book in 1965. It's now a dead law, but that imposed slavery on black people in Barbados from 1838 to 1937, another 100 years of slavery. So we are celebrating today. Today we are celebrating 60 years, 70 years of emancipation from slavery in Barbados. Since 1937. Why do I say so? Because it is only after 1937 that you could have people moving off the plantations and retaining their land, going into Bridgetown and work. Right? People in the Second World War, like my father went to serve the British Empire and came back. And they saw life, and they got ideas. They therefore diversified their activities from cutting sugarcane till it burned their hands. It is only after 1937 that you see Lord Moyne coming to Barbados and the other Caribbean territories and saying, this nonsense must stop. We must have welfare housing. We must have trade unions. It is only after 1937 that you get a trade union in Barbados. The act is passed in 1939. It comes into being in 1941. And Grantley Adams and Hugh Springer and Frank Walcott pilot that institution. It is only in the 1940s that you get workmen's compensation, because if the dray car had run over your head, and before that, all that happens is that you lost your brains. As my mother said, just another black bottle broken. No compensation to you or your family. There was no workman's compensation, no sickness benefit, no mothers and child concession. People did not get time off to go and have children. They squatted, dropped out the baby, and went back to work. After 1937, Master Day done in Barbados. Or has it? But that is why I'm saying that we had another installment of slavery until 1937. And we are now reaping the rewards of people like Wilberforce and Busser and Samuel J. Prescott and Sarah Ann Gill in the 19th century. And since then, Duncan O'Neill, Grantley Adams, Clement Payne, Errol Barrow, Frank Walcott, Hugh Springer. Did I miss any? But then I've missed Gary Sobers, but that's for cricket. He didn't have to cut sugarcane until you burn your hands. So that's another form, that's another kind of national hero. So our present position is dependent in far off times on Wilberforce, and more so as we come to the present, to the toil of our people and their leaders. Our people went off to Panama. They became silver men. White people were paid in gold. Black people, mainly Jamaicans and Barbadians, were called the silver men because their wages were rated in silver and they were paid pennies. They contracted malaria, asthma, whatever, but they built that big ditch. We have not yet got reparations for it. But those people took their pennies, and when they came back, they went in Barbados, they put those things in the post office. They purchased plantations, 4 Hills in St. James, La Salle, 4 Hills, St. Peter, La Salle, St. James, other things. Some of them set up shop. Some of them let the money accumulate in the bank, the penny savings bank. Gerard Simmons' father, MacDonald Simmons, set up a savings bank. A.G. Gittins set up a peasants' loan bank. People dealt with the susu. Right? What do we call it now? Right? We call it the, what do you call it? No, you call it on Belmont Road. What is it? Cooperatives. The credit union, right? But before that, you called it the Meeting Turn, Friendly Society, Share Hand, Susu, Brother Jackson, what you call it in Trinidad, those kinds of things. That is how our people got by. Our people used homeopathic remedies because they couldn't afford to go to doctors, and some doctors did not treat black people. So we had a terrible time. We had a terrible time because of being black. Our people could not go to schools. You had schools like Harrison College, Queen's College, and Lord School. And that is why people fear historians, because we see documents that nobody ever thought that we would ever see. That anybody looking like me would see a document which 12 white people sat around a table and consented and the secretary wrote. For example, in the 1920s, a man called Walker in St. Joseph with 12 children, 9 boys. One of his sons applied for a vestry scholarship. And the people at the Lord School at the parish level, headed by the priests, debated that matter viciously. And ultimately they gave his son a vestry scholarship because they said, and I quote, "He is a decent man, although he's a colored man." And people in Barbados want you to say there was no racism in Barbados. Racism was the consequence of slavery. Racism was the consequence of the slave trade. Racism was the consequence of the horrific things done to our people on the Middle Passage and in Barbados. Racism existed in Barbados up to the time I left school in 1967, because St. Winifred's School, which was set up for white girls, did not accept black girls until afterwards. Codrington High School, set up for white girls, did not accept black girls until 1965. I know these things, I saw them. I don't even have to look at the documentation. So our people have fought against racism and segregation in a country which some people say has been under-researched because it is felt that our country gave the impetus to the South Africans for apartheid. Yes, people have said that it has been shown that Barbados has created a patent, not just for economic development of a particular kind, but for how to keep people segregated, undervalued, and repressed while remaining within the law. Because when you go through the laws of Barbados in the 20th century, you cannot pin anything and say this is racism. You have to get interviews, you have to get oral research, you have to come across instances like the one I just identified to understand that our society owed nothing to South Africa during the apartheid system. In fact, we are checking to see if somebody from Barbados went down to South Africa and showed the National Party and John Smuts and Danny Malan and Veerwood and Botha, right? And showed them how to rule black people while staying within the law. So our society, ladies and gentlemen, it not only owes the United Nations, it not only owes them an apology for the fact that in 1672 Barbadians were part of the Royal African Company. 5 Barbadians. in a group of 8 shareholders, the principal shareholders, the only company charged with the responsibility and the right to bring cargoes of black people to the Caribbean. 5 Barbadians. That tells you how important our society was, how deeply our society was involved with the British in making black people slaves. So that is Barbados in the past. What about Barbados in the present? Where does the present begin? Some say 1966, when we became independent. Some say 1950s, when you people, anybody here was interviewed by Mr. Pickwood, when the bus drivers, all 4,000 of them came up here, 1956, the nurses, 52, 53, people in the tea shops, people in the hotels, those people on the undergrounds, and those people licking stamps in the post office. Some people say modern Barbados begins then, because our people are allowed to travel then. And there is some measure of truth in that, because your grandparents and your parents came here and you think it was just a simple matter. Initially, migration to Britain was intended for white Barbadians, but life for them was so pretty and so good that they decided not to come. That's why Mr. Pickwood had to come to Barbados in the 1950s to see if these N-word, plural, could actually fit into British society. And he discovered that people had been to the modern high school under Louis Lynch, that some of them were at Queen's College, some were at Combermere, very few from Harrison College, 1 or 2 from Lodge in the 1960s, but that these people were eminently eligible to take on the role of a menial, manual working class in Britain. So your predecessors came here not to cut sugarcane till it burned their hand, but you know what they came here to do. Not to go into Oxford and Cambridge and not to fit into the House of Commons or to become the new middle class. You came here to struggle, to shed blood, tears, toil, and sweat to bring you to where you are now. So some people say that's where Barbados comes, where modern Barbados begins. And why do I instance that? Because it is now in the 1950s. The Second World War is over. Britain has bled. She has lost 9 million people, and including her soldiery. Now is the time for all good men and women to come to the aid of the mother country. Modern Britain could not have done without that injection of black blood. Remember, ancient slavery in the Caribbean could not have proceeded without that injection of black cargoes. Modern Britain depended on the West Indies and on Barbados and Jamaica in particular to reach where it is now. Give yourself a pat on the back, right? Nobody's done it yet, right? But without your contribution, modern Britain would have been like Spain is now, or Portugal, right? Third-rate European economies. Right? So it is when Britain accedes to the notion of bringing black cargoes to the mother country now to help with the reconstruction that you can see that the wheel, as King Lear has said, had come full circle. People who were the refuse of the empire, who went to those barren rocks in the Caribbean to make them productive as sugar-producing territories, now came to Britain to make it productive after the horrors and rigors of war. And a lot of people don't see it that way. But it was restitution, it was recompense, in a sense, for having, for your ancestors having cut sugarcane for 2.5 centuries, etc. So modern Barbados, perhaps, in terms of the slave trade, begins then. Britain gives you reparation. Britain gives you jobs, it gives you salaries, it gives you wages. Although some people may say that ain't true. Nonetheless, I stick by that point for the moment. However, back home, modern Barbados forgot about the slave trade. We forgot about the slave trade because we were now moving towards the unthinkable, becoming independent. I will not deal with that except to say that there were discussions and debates in Barbados in the 1960s, and Mr. Barrow triumphed. He very nearly lost the election. He lost the popular vote, like Manning this year, in the elections of 1966. but he took Barbados to independence in 1966. And he started on a path of modernization, which successive administrators, successive prime ministers have done. So we in Barbados connived at forgetting the slave trade, and we now focused our eyes on the prize, making Barbados an annex to the first world. And in 41 years, we have done so. We've done so, and we have brought Barbados to the point now where we can look anybody in the face and say we have contributed not just to Britain, but to ourselves. We've pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps. And therefore the question people ask in Barbados, why confuse us with the slave trade? Why do you tell us about something that happened 200 years ago? Of course, we know there is collective racial self-hate in Barbados. As I indicated earlier, there's collective shame. We have been taught that our ancestors became slaves because they were an inferior breed of human beings. They came from Africa where there was savagery, polygamy, obeah, witchcraft, voodoo, and other forms of mandrake, the magician's activity in Halloween. And I tell them, so children want to tell their parents to kill me because I say Halloween is white people obeah. You call it Halloween and you say it's voodoo in the Caribbean. Right? So our attitude in Barbados is that this year, 2007, let us get rid of it fast. We don't want to deal with the slave trade. We don't want to have any kind of mea culpa, any kind of bleeding, and any kind of getting down on your knees and saying to God, I'm sorry for the slave trade and for Barbados' involvement. But we must. We must, because slavery can come again. And I look at Barbados and I see possibilities, I see evidence of psychological slavery, and I see possibilities of new slavery. Let me deal with evidence of psychological slavery. All of you in here, without exception, have been taught that Horatio Lord Nelson saved Barbados from the French. 99.9% of you in here believe it, and you tell your English people, oh, we put up a statue to Nelson before you British did. You were told something which never happened. You were told that a man who, yes, he's a British hero. Yes, he won the Battle of Trafalgar. He lost his life on the 21st of October, 1805 in the process. He never saved Barbados from anything. He visited Barbados 3 times, once as a 19-year-old sailor, secondly as a 28-year-old captain of the ship Boreas. He never outed even a fire. I doubt he even caught flying fish there. In 1805, he visited Barbados and Carlisle Bay. He never even came ashore. He was checking to see if Villeneuve had come there. He discovered he had not. He heard that Villeneuve might have gone to Trinidad. He went to Trinidad. He discovered that Villeneuve was not in Trinidad, and as the book says, in high dudgeon, he went back across the Atlantic to rest and relaxation. Then in September, the Admiralty told him that Villeneuve and Gravina were holed up in Toulon on the Mediterranean side of France, and that they were trying to sneak home. Napoleon had called them home, and they were trying to get through past Gibraltar, the Bay of Biscay, the English Channel, to get to Calais. Nelson and Hood took 27 ships and went down the English Channel, caught them off Cape Trafalgar, split the French and Spanish fleet of 33 ships in 2, captured 26, sank some of the others, defeated the French, one of the 15 most decisive battles of the world. It had nothing to do with Barbados. The man said, England expects every man to do his duty, not Little England. He never fought for Barbados. Why? He did not like Barbados. He called it a desolate place. He married a woman, Fanny Nisbet from Nevis. He was stationed 7 years in Jamaica. He spent rest and relaxation time in Antigua. He never liked Barbados. The Barbadians never liked him. But on the 21st of October, 1805, when he lost his life, the white elite in Barbados, like scavengers, went for his glory. Nelson saved us from the French. And we have discovered, ladies and gentlemen, he did not. He died in 1805. The French threatened Barbados in 1806, and 1807, and 1809. And finally, Governor Beckwith took an expedition to Guadeloupe and Martinique in 1810 and massacred them, as we would say in Barbados. He came back home in triumph, and the Barbadian House of Assembly took an area which was a market square and called it Beckwith Square. It is now Beckwith Mall in Barbados. He saved Barbados from the French. But the white Barbadians sold us a story. And on the 22nd of March 1813, they put up a statue to Nelson. And from then until 1963, black people would go in sun and rain and bow down to Nelson, and the white elite would say praise for Nelson and how Nelson saved Barbados from the French. And you know who stopped that? Errol Walton Barrow. He stopped it in 1963. And as you know, he stopped us celebrating Guy Fawkes Day in 1966. Those things are irrelevant to Barbados. And he stopped us celebrating Nelson's achievement. Because Nelson didn't save Barbados from nothing. I'm in England. I'm about, 1,000 miles from, Gibraltar. Gibraltar is 50 miles from Cape Trafalgar. If you check the history of Gibraltar, the Gibraltarians do not have that Nelson saved them from the French. And they were being besieged by the Spanish. And if Nelson had lost the Battle of Trafalgar, Gibraltar would be Spanish now. It is still British. Gibraltar is 250 miles from Malta in the Mediterranean. The Maltese were besieged by the French. If Nelson had lost the Battle of Trafalgar, the French would have come for them. The Maltese do not have in their history that Nelson saved them from the French. Barbados is 4,186 miles from Spain, and we have that Nelson saved us from the French. He did not save Grenada, St. Vincent, Antigua, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, Montserrat, Anguilla, Jamaica, Trinidad, Tobago, Guyana, just Barbados. You see how we have been fooled? And ladies and gentlemen, there are people in Barbados who, when I say so, tell me I want killing. Don't tape this, because I tell them, I was a cadet at law school. I know how to shoot bullets. I know gutter port, and I can pelt big rocks. Furthermore, I tell people, I do that every day. And any man who come and attack me for saying that Nelson did not save Barbados, you're filming me. I won't say anything more. But I have a law degree, and I know that the law allows you to kill in self-defense. But that is how our people feel. They are still enslaved. And when you cannot accept the fact that lies have been told in the past, people can tell lies to you in the future. How people can understand that? If you believe that Nelson saved you from the French, if you believe that Sam Lord was a pirate, people can come and tell you, look, this mole of matter that just came through the large colon, this is high-grade sugar. Eat it. And it will happen, ladies and gentlemen. And again, this is being filmed, but I will not tell you, I will tell people in private. I can see a sign no larger than a cloud no larger than a man's hand, portending the future enslavement of Barbados and Barbadians. And all I will say, ladies and gentlemen, is that we should do like the Americans do. When Americans have new immigrants, they put them through 3 years in purgatory before they reach the heaven of becoming American citizens. And they make them study American history and sign on the dotted line and swear on the Bible that they will uphold all the values of America. We Barbadians should be doing that. And instead we allow Tom, Dick, Harry, Larry, and Mary to come in from every part of the world and enjoy what our ancestors have built up in the days of slavery. What our people from Panama built up. What you with your remittances built up. 20 years from now, we might be still in a new slavery in Barbados. We might be in a new slavery in Barbados, ladies and gentlemen. Because if we cannot believe what historians tell you about the past, and we are the Jeremiahs and the Isaiahs, we lament, we see far back, therefore we can see forward. And we tell you things, and people, oh mind he, man, he's a twister, man. He mad. The day cometh, saith the Lord, right? When the madman will be justified. But it is no joy to be justified when you see your people going into a new slavery. and a new slavery for Barbados is eminently possible, ladies and gentlemen. And in closing, I therefore advise and warn you to be vigilant in protection of the freedom which you have gained from being Barbadians and being descendants of Bussa, Nanny Grigg, and being descendants of those people who came here in the 50s, and the Sarienta and the Ascoli, and what else? And the Ascania, etc., right? Keep fighting on, ladies and gentlemen. Keep supporting Barbados and keep supporting the issue of reparations. Keep supporting the notion of having that jewel set in an azure sea, that island just 100 miles to the east of St. Vincent. Keep us buoyant. Keep yourselves interested in Barbados, and make sure that even if the people on Barbados soil turn idiotic, that you maintain your senses and you do not allow slavery to be repeated in Barbados. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. And I could see why you were not allowed to speak freely in Barbados.